in the air. It's hockey night tonight.
Tonight.
Tension grows,
All right.
the whistle blows, and the puck goes down the ice. The goalie jumps and the players bump and the fans all go insane. Someone roars, Bobby scores at the good old hockey game. Oh, the good old hockey game.
Welcome, everybody. It's our show. Yossi G here. Hi. Let me introduce you to my main man, Dan the Man Friedman. What's going on, Dan?
Not too much. How you doing?
Thank God, doing well. And you know, it was kind of interesting last night. First off, I mean, we got to talk a bit. What happened in Boston? Explain this to me. You have a team that has the Bruins on the ropes. This is a team, the Bruins are a team that should never be taken lightly. You have them on the ropes. You're up 4-1. Next thing you know, it's 4-4, pandemonium 1.0 in Boston. And what happened? What happened in that game? I was watching it with my wife, which is a whole separate story for a whole separate day. But oh my gosh, it was insanely incredible. I was hoping that the Bruins would score one when they pulled the goalie, just to make it interesting, make it more exciting. You know, you're on your feet, but to actually win, or actually at that point to actually tie, what happened?
It's hard to really explain what happened. I mean, the long and the short of it is the Maple Leafs didn't get the job done. They couldn't clear the puck, and the Bruins were really relentless in the offensive zone towards the end of that game. They really ratcheted up the pressure, and the Leafs they just couldn't clear the zone, and that's a huge issue. Whether there's 10 minutes left, 3 minutes left, it really doesn't matter. If you give any team too much time in the offensive zone, they're going to make it pay for it sooner or later. And in this case, they made the Leafs pay for it 3 times. You know, at a time when they really should not have been giving up 3 goals. They really needed to just close this one out, and and unfortunately, it ended up being disastrous for the Maple Leafs.
Yes, they couldn't clear the puck, and when they cleared the puck, it turned into an icing, so that doesn't really help the matter for them. And what really showed, right, the Bruins are down 4-1. It was early. It was 2-1. Then Rafi Torres goal and Nazem Kadri goal, which you thought was going to hold as the game winner. Early in the third, in the second into the third period, and then suddenly it's crowd silent. You took the wind out of Boston, and then they score 1 goal, and then at the I believe it was about 6:15 left, 6:10 left in the game, there was that. The play where Big Z, where Zdeno Chara nearly had a goal. He just overskated. It just went past him. At that point, I think Claude Julien is thinking to himself, guys, you see how close we're getting. All we need to do is throw pucks on the net. We have nothing to lose, because if we don't score, we're going to lose. We're going home. So it doesn't really matter if there's going to be an odd man rush per se. So it's just go on the net, throw everything you've got on Toronto and see what happens. And that was an insane game, an incredible finish. And I'll be honest, I was going between, the Rangers are playing in the second period and let me go check up and see what's going on in Boston. It was the other way around. Except the NHL is the only sport outside of baseball for the home half of a game where if you're in overtime, there are no commercials. Right. The game will end when the game ends. The only commercials will be in between periods. But that's it. That's just because they have to, Zamboni the ice. But if they didn't have to do that, if there was an automatic thing for the Zamboni or for the ice to just, get clean and washed, then it wouldn't never go to a commercial break until somebody scores. So just that in and of itself was incredible. I'm looking at Toronto, and they have so many weapons. You thought this might be the ultimate Phil Kessel, to heck with Boston, screw you, you traded me here, I'm going to knock you guys out of the postseason. And it doesn't turn out that way. I'm looking at the way he played in this first round, that since he's been in Toronto, this is, of course, the first time in the quote-unquote new NHL that Toronto has made the postseason, I'm looking at this first round, even though Kessel specifically, but Toronto as a whole, did not make it beyond the first round, that they got the proverbial monkey off their back, that they actually have moved on, that they've embraced what the pressure and what the fans expect from them, and that the future for Toronto in Toronto is bright. What do you look at that with Phil Kessel? What's his mentality going forward? What's Toronto's thinking going forward?
I think it's just again to build off of the success of this year, and I think the team that they iced this year is not drastically different from the one they iced last year. And the only difference is that they got the job done and they didn't melt down towards the end of the year and fall out of playoff contention. But again with Phil Kessel, you saw him really dominate. He had a great series. Like you said, the team didn't advance yet, but he had a great series. That guy has been very productive ever since he was first traded to the Maple Leafs, and I'm really not sure why the fans gave him such a hard time for so many years. One guy can only do so much, and the team wasn't exactly performing, but he always showed up. And the most important thing at the Leafs now, I think, is that they have a goaltender that they can rely on back there, who's going to be steady and give them a chance to win every night, and that's huge. James Reimer has been outstanding. I'd say he stole 2 games in this series. This series would have been over much quicker if not for him.
Well, also, I'm looking at what Toronto's fan base, and they have the Hockey Hall of Fame is there, the NHL office's headquarters are there. It's that pressure to win now, win every single game. If they go 81-1, the fans aren't going to be happy in a regular season because you didn't go 82-0. It's kind of, in a sense, like New York Yankees fans in New York. When they won 3 straight championships in the late 90s into 2000, and they're in the World Series again for the 4th consecutive year in 2001 against the Diamondbacks. They're up 2-1 at the end of the 8th inning, going into the 9th inning, Game 7. Alfonso Soriano hits that solo home run in the bottom of the 8th. The Yankees are up 2-1. You're thinking Mariano Rivera is going to come into the game, going to close it out, and, we're going to have a party up on Broadway again. Of course, we all know that didn't happen. The Yankees lost in the bottom of the 9th, and or rather, it was the top of the 8th. Then they lost in the bottom of the 9th to Arizona, and the fan mentality really was summed up when Joe Torre went on to one of the talk radio stations a couple days after the last game, and the host asked him what his take was, what Joe Torre's take was on the Yankees, on New York City, on the fans, and kind of this whole pot together, what his take was on his experience up to that point in New York and of the fans. And he put it really, really well. In a nutshell, he said that he met a specific fan, didn't say who, and when the fan said, it's too bad that we didn't win this game, that we didn't win the World Series, Joey's like, oh yeah, you know what, we'll try next year, we'll do our best. He's like, and the fan says, that's too bad because we really would have liked to have a 4th one in a row.
Right.
That's what it seems like to me, the Toronto fan base is like, and truth be told, there's nothing wrong with that. Because as a fan, as a supporter of a specific franchise that you root for, you want your team to do the best that they can. And if they can't, then why are you playing? As Herm Edwards said so famously as a coach of the New York Jets, you play to win the game.
Right.
And I really think that the Toronto Maple Leafs have the pieces, they have the players, they have now the personnel to do something beyond just the regular season, especially for the fans. They don't have to wear those ridiculous bags over their heads anymore with like drunken eyes and stuff. Moving along to the other game of last night, Rangers Capitals. It was a complete and utter demolition on the Rangers' part. You really did not see any sort of must-win now urgency. There was nothing from the Capitals. What was going on there? What was this something that a first-year coach didn't know or doesn't know how to bring out from his players, or was just the players just not playing?
Yeah, I'd like to say that the coaching was part of it, but unfortunately, this is something we've seen from the Capitals for a couple of years now. It's become a trend where they've underperformed, or they've bowed out spectacularly. And they, I don't care who the coach is. There's no excuse for Alex Ovechkin's performance in the series after Game 1. He was very good in Game 1, but really ever since then, there were times where he was on, and there were times where you could tell he looked disinterested. And the guy who's wearing the C on the jersey, to have him doing that, it certainly doesn't set the right tone for the team. But yeah, I think that after the first couple of shifts in this Game 7, which I thought the Capitals played very well, for the first couple of minutes, I think after that though, they just, like you said, they really just showed no urgency whatsoever. They literally handed the game to the Rangers, and the Rangers are not a team that just goes out and scores 5 goals. They do that if you let them into the game. Not to say the Rangers aren't a good team, but they don't score goals very often. So, to not show up on the scoreboard, to not really have any sense of urgency, I think that, that was obviously their undoing, and it's not acceptable. It's not okay. I wouldn't pin it on Adam Oates. I think that group of guys who have done this for a couple of years now, and it doesn't take a Scotty Bowman to tap Alexander Ovechkin on the shoulder and say, hey, we need you to step up tonight in a Game 7 with the season on the line. He's got to know that by now, especially as the captain of this team and as someone who was up for the MVP award, and we'll get to that later. He's gotta step up, and that goes to the rest of the guys on the Capitals as well. None of them really, except for some of the grinders, most of them didn't have a good game and didn't play hard, and I think that they deserved to lose this series, quite frankly, a series in which they were in control for much of.
Yeah, and you saw that this was the first game that the home team did not win, as each previous of the 6 games the home team took away. What seemed to me here is you have Alex Ovechkin, who really was a fourth liner in last night's game, disguised as the first liner, because all he did, especially in the series, since Game 2, did not record 1 point, and all he was doing really was checking people. Taking a few shots, but checking people. That seemed to have been his forte in the last few games.
I wouldn't quite go that far and say that he didn't do anything, but I think that he certainly didn't do enough. I think he did have, there were times where he did have good scoring chances, and I think that, he did set the tone at certain times, and I think he did play with passion at certain times. But it was just that he didn't do it often enough, and that he took shifts off. And I think that was the big problem. I don't think he looked like a fourth liner necessarily, but he certainly didn't look like Alex Ovechkin.
I hear what you're saying. I think also the Rangers' defense did something to Ovechkin that he has never experienced before. It wasn't a play defense by committee, and it wasn't a one-person tagging Ovechkin the entire game. This was a mixture, and you even had forwards following him at various points throughout the game just to mix things up, change the dimension of defense that he is used to facing. Change the defensive combinations on him, whether it even is a forward going on. We saw at various times Callahan playing him as well, as you would have Dan Girardi and Steve Eminger and those players. He really was thrown off for a loop since Game 2 by the Rangers. They saw what they allowed him to do, or rather what things he took advantage of in the first 2 games, and then collectively as a whole unit, not just a defensive unit, but as a whole team really, said, we are not going to let him beat us. If they're going to beat us, it's going to be the Joel Wards. It's going to be the Jason Chimera's. It's going to be the Nick Backstrom.
That was the difference between the first 2 games and the rest of the series. I think that, and this is an observation that I made at the time, is that the Capitals really dictated the pace, I think, the first 2 games.
Yeah.
And the Rangers don't skate well, and they're, if you're going to try and get in a firefight with the Capitals, you're not going to win. So, I think, and I kept saying what the Rangers needed to do was slow the game down, make them play along the boards, make them grind it out, and make them play that defense-first hockey. And I think there were times where the Capitals showed that they were capable of doing that too, and that's what really gave the Rangers a scare here. But as for Ovechkin, I still, I do agree that the defense was more stifling and that it was tough for him. But at the same token, I would say that if he would have shown a little more effort and not taking certain shifts off, I still think he would have scored. I'm not saying he would have would light it up, but I do think that he would have been certainly more productive than he was in this series. I think that was a big part of it because Ovechkin has scored against Norris Trophy. He's outdeep Norris Trophy winners. He's shown that he's capable of beating any defender, and really he's got the skill set to do it. So I don't think he was gonna put on a Crosby-esque performance, but I do think that he would have shown you a little more than he did had he played a little harder. The defense certainly made it much harder for him, and Henrik Lundqvist stood on his head, which of course didn't help things for the Capitals offense either. There were games where the Capitals offense certainly showed up, and Henrik Lundqvist was there to save the day. I wouldn't say last night was one of them by any stretch, but certainly Game 6 was one of those games.
Yes. Certainly, but of course here it's Game 7. Everything's on the line. The captain certainly did not capitalize on some of the opportunities that he had throughout the night. But now going to the other New York team that was in the postseason, your Islanders certainly put up more than just a fight to the Pittsburgh Penguins. They really showed that even though the Penguins have this superb treasure trove of offensive firepower, even so have glaring weaknesses. But for a moment, we'll hold up with Pittsburgh. What is your observation on the Islanders going forward? They made the postseason. Some will say that this season, because it was only 48 games, allowed for the Islanders to squeak in. Had it even been 55 games, 50 or even 55 games, they may not have made the playoffs because they were on a tailspin towards the end of the season. Although some would argue, as I'm sure you would, that the tailspin wasn't the last 2 weeks of the season. It was probably 2 months into in the second to last month, and then they kind of got their game going back in order to secure that last seed. What is the outlook for the Islanders going forward next season, as well as to the seasons beyond that, with the roster they have, who they have to bring in, and to answer those critics on the 82-game season?
Well, first of all, I would say as far as the tailspin is concerned, it was a 3-game tailspin, and 2 of those games they lost in overtime or shootout, so they picked up a point in 2 of those 3 games. So, and the reason why I don't think it was a fluke is because it's not like they were mediocre for the entire season and kind of just, eased their way into the playoffs because that was the stopping point. This team lost 2 regulation games between March 30th and the end of the season. And you don't go 11-1 and whatever unless you're a changed team. That's not a fluke. When you rattle off that kind of performance, that is not a fluke. They were a completely different team from that point on, and they really just pulled full steam ahead out of nowhere almost. And really stormed into the playoffs. I wouldn't even say they eased their way in. So that's why I have a hard time agreeing to the half season theory. And aside from that, is anyone going to take that Stanley Cup away from the New Jersey Devils, 95 Stanley Cup during the shortened season? I don't think so. Right. So you know what? I don't necessarily put so much on that. And certainly, the Islanders' performance in the playoffs proved that they belonged there. They didn't, like you said, they didn't just show up to the playoffs. They gave the Penguins a run for their money, and quite frankly, on most nights, the Islanders were even the better team in the game. So they were 2 saves and 2 overtime goals away from winning this series. So I thought they showed a lot of heart. I thought they showed a lot. I thought a lot of these young players, especially certainly John Tavares. I had mentioned yesterday, especially with these young stars, that they perform in the regular season, but I think ultimately everyone asks the question, is he a pressure player? Can he handle it? And John Tavares had 5 points in 6 games in the playoffs and a game-winning goal, and 2 other goals that were both big. So, I think he certainly answered that question and, showed that he could be a playoff performer and he's going to be a star, obviously for years to come. Guys like Casey Cizikas, Josh Bailey, Kyle Oposo, who really turned it on. So a lot of these guys, they just showed no quit. They came back in games. They came back down 2 goals in games, down 3 goals in games, and they showed that they really do have a bright future. Now, I do think that they have some questions, obviously, to answer, especially in goal. Evgeny Nabokov wasn't exactly stellar. Right. I wouldn't say that it was his fault they lost the series, but I wouldn't say he didn't win them the series. At the same time, I think he was very tired because they played him just about every night at the end of, for the rest of the season, and he was also facing an offense that, they're capable of making Patrick Waugh look like Marc-Andre Fleury. So,
Right.
if you look at just the depth on that Pittsburgh team, can you really blame the guy for getting the 4 goals a night? I'm not sure I can. I think there are very few goalies who would actually keep so many pucks out, against that team.
Then,
I think Craig Nana was one of those guys, but
right.
We'll get to that later.
Well, then is that a coaching problem? If Jack Capuano knows that his goalie can only perform till a certain point, then is it a coaching strategic problem then that he should bring out the best in his defenders, however they would strategize to nullify as much as they can the firepower of the opposition?
I think the defense was better down the stretch, but I think the problem also is the Islanders really had no choice but to play Nabokov down the stretch because they were fighting to get into the playoffs.
No, I'm talking even against the Pittsburgh Penguins. If you know that you're fighting firepower up the wazoo.
100%. The defense needed to be better, and I think that there were obviously moments where there were defensive lapses and that kind of screwed them over. But again, there's only so much you can do against a team like this, with so much offensive firepower. So I don't completely fault them. Had this been the Phoenix Coyotes, I would have an issue.
Right.
But certainly Pittsburgh has enough talent to score as many goals as they did.
Well, in their series now upcoming against the Senators, you have the Penguins. I really look at the two key guys in that series as being Paul Martin for the Penguins because he can skate all day and he can create shots and offense just by doing what he does. He's like that guy that's overlooked simply because of all the other guys that are on that team. But if he was on a team, let's say like the St. Louis Blues, he would be the guy. And with the Ottawa Senators, Erik Karlsson, who might be in it for a little bit of a grudge match against the Penguins, especially after what Matt Cook did to Karlsson, knocking him out for over 30 games this season with a partially torn ACL. So I look at those two guys as the series changers. Karlsson and his defense, throw in a little bit of Craig Anderson, see how well he can play against the firepower of the Penguins. And the Penguins and their offense and their offensive juggernaut. But I really think the key guy is the one who's overlooked, that being Paul Martin.
I do hear that. I think that for them, it's gonna be Thomas Vokoun because Craig Anderson, again, I say if there's a goalie who can shut down the Penguins, I'd say Henrik Lundqvist is one of them. Craig Anderson is certainly the other, and I think that it's Thomas Vokoun is going to have to be up to the task. I told people, if the Islanders had Henrik Lundqvist, they would have won this series, and I truly believe they would have. If you can neutralize that Penguins offense a little bit, and their goaltending is problematic, you're going to give them a hard time. I think Craig Anderson certainly has the ability to do that, and Thomas Vokoun he's done a pretty good job stepping in for Marc-Andre Fleury, but he's really going to have to be. I don't think he has to be as good as Anderson, but he's going to have to be up there. Because otherwise they're gonna have a lot of trouble. And this is an Ottawa team that can score, not just from their offense, but from the back end as well. Erik Karlsson, like you mentioned, this guy is basically a forward who plays defense. Just because you stop the first wave of offense, you got to worry about what happens when they pass the puck back to Karlsson on the blue line. It's a lot to handle. I really think for the Penguins, honestly, I think that they are severely overrated. I don't think that they are going to win the Stanley Cup. Everyone's ready to hand it to them at the trade deadline, and I think that people overlook the fact that this team is really horrendous on defense. They give up a lot. They blow a lot of leads. A lot of their defensemen are very slow. And Chris Letang, their so-called Norris Trophy winner, is an offense-only player who is not really good defensively and had a lot of turnovers in that last series against the Islanders. I don't know why the guy is nominated. We'll get to that later, but. This Penguins defense is not that good, and I don't care. You can have all the firepower you want on offense. If you can't stop the puck from going in your net, you're going to have a hard time winning the series.
Well, just on the last note on the series before we move on to the next, I look at the Penguins and I look at what happened with them last season against the Flyers, and then I look at what the Senators bring to the table. I see the Senators taking this in 6 games. I really don't see it going beyond that because the Senators have a much better goaltender than than Brizgalov, then the puck is so big. The net's humongous big. I really don't see Anderson letting in that many goals, and it seemed to be.
I'll tell you what it is with Philly though. They perfected the art of beating Pittsburgh because they really got the Penguins off their game. They kind of agitated them a lot, and when the Penguins get agitated, they lose their composure. I mean, even it just shocked me, and even in the Islanders series, there were moments where Jerome McGinley started throwing punches. Brendan Morrow, slammed, I think it was Travis Hamonick's head into the ice 3 times, with the ref right in front. But again, like, these are veteran guys. You don't expect it from them. Last year against the Flyers, Sidney Crosby was, throwing, I think he was throwing Claude Giroux's glove across the ice. So, they just lost their composure. And I think that starts with the coaching. Dan Bylsma is not a very good coach. He doesn't keep his players composed. His teams are very poorly, are not disciplined. And I think that's a big problem. So, if you can get them off their game, you can beat them.
And that seems to be their biggest weakness and the X factor. And I think that Erik Karlsson, and the other defenders, as well as the coaching staff for the Senators, they know that. They watch the film. They hear about it. What the people talking as to how to get the Penguins off their game. And they will be drinking that anti-Penguin Kool-Aid. And they will win 6 games. Moving along, we have, of course, the Blues were eliminated by the Kings a second straight season. This, though, was not a sweep by the Kings. It was in 6 games. Nonetheless, the Blues not having enough firepower to move beyond the current defending Stanley Cup champions. Ineffective power play. Their mental toughness wasn't there. They, of course, were plagued by the untimely mistakes throughout the games that they had. And, of course, they let up a 2-0 lead in games and allowed for the Kings to sweep the next 4 games and to beat them. I think here it really ends up being the Blues not having enough weapons to match up to the Kings man-to-man that really caused for the Kings to overcome their ineptitude in the first 2 games. And the key here in that series was Brian Elliott played well, but he didn't play well enough going up against Jonathan Quick.
I don't know. I wouldn't say he didn't play well enough. I think that he did. I think that it's twofold. First of all, like you mentioned, I think that St. Louis just doesn't have the firepower yet, and I think they needed guys like a Vladimir Tarasenko to step up. And certainly he was a healthy scratch for some of the series, and in any event, he didn't play well enough. But I don't think they had the firepower, and also that defense, that Blues defense is still relatively young. Some of these guys, Alex Pietrangelo, Kevin Shattenkirk, these are younger guys. They'll be back. This team is going to be back. It's going to be competitive for a long time. But I think, for those guys on defense, they need to gain a little more experience. I think that they'll get there eventually. But certainly the Kings, have defensive depth of their own, and they're all experienced, and they've all won the Stanley Cup. And so I think that played in as well. This is a team that wasn't fazed by the early 2-0 series deficit. They came back, they played their game, they won. And I think that I really could have seen this series going either way. I know a lot of people have picked the Blues to win. I picked the Kings.
I picked the Kings as well.
I thought they were a little more well-rounded, and I thought they had the experience to beat St. Louis, and that's kind of what happened.
Well, talking about one of the heroes for Los Angeles, Slava Voina, will he be a hero against the Sharks? I did not pick the Sharks to win, to beat Vancouver. I thought Vancouver, with the Twins coming back healthy, would be able to beat the Sharks, because the Sharks usually are like Washington. They play in the regular season, can't play in the playoffs, and they
played another team like that in Vancouver, so you knew one of these teams was actually going to move on. So.
Well, yeah, they had to, but usually you figure that San Jose is the bigger choke artist because of those times, at least in the early stages of the postseason. But now they go up against LA, the Battle of California. I think that it's going to be a difference maker between, well, of course, the Kings and Jonathan Quick is an X factor there, but I think Voina.
So was Anthony Yemi.
Yeah. And also, I think Rafi Torres on the Kings now, he really knows that this seems like it's his time, almost. Him, Joe Thornton, Patrick Marleau, Couturier, you have all these players on the Sharks. How are they going to make sure that the Kings don't do what the Kings do? They've won 5 straight playoff series, the Kings have. Now, It's nothing like what the Isles did in the early 80s of 19 straight, and nobody's going to ever match that. That's a record safe in Toronto. No one's touching that in the record books. But at the end of the day, they still have won 5 straight series. They are the Stanley Cup, the defending champions. How are they going to unseat the Kings?
Play their game, plain and simple. The Sharks are really, I'd say they're a very run and gun team, and they have the pieces to do it. The Kings can also have firepower, but again, I think even with that good defense, it's just a lot to handle, especially when you're up against a team that has a great goaltender too, in Antti Niemi.
And the experience.
Right, and experience. Niemi has won a Stanley Cup. If he shuts down the Kings, and you've got to deal with Thornton, you've got to deal with Marlowe, you've got to deal with Logan Couture, Joe Pavelski. The list really goes on. And I think that I'm not sure that the Sharks are going to win the Stanley Cup this year or go there necessarily, but this is one of those years where they're going to be a threat, and I think that they're going to win this series. I think that they are pretty balanced in their own right. They have Brent Burns back there on defense and Dan Boyle. These guys are very good. So I've been impressed with the Sharks all year, really, and I think that they're a determined hockey team right now, as are the Kings. But I think that the Sharks, I think it's going to be a very tight series. I think the Sharks are going to be a little too much to handle for the Kings.
Oh, I think so too. I think this is going to go to Game 7, and I think the reason why the Sharks will win and they will unseat the defending Cup champions is because they are playing home ice. They've had so much success at home. Their crowd gets into it. The crowd rocks and rolls, and if they score the first goal, which they've done more often than not throughout the season and the playoffs.
The Kings have the home ice advantage, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, they do, and they get behind their crowd, and they just ride that wave. And I think that the Sharks are going to take a bite out of the Kings' crown and really move on to the next round, either to play against the Red Wings or the Chicago Blackhawks. And in that series, the Red Wings and the Blackhawks, this is just an intense series. They both don't like each other. Simple as that. End of story.
Soon to no longer be divisional rivals, but yeah, it's true.
They still don't like each other. Even if the Red Wings would move to the Eastern Conference, they still wouldn't hate each other. It's as simple as that. The teams, they have respect for each other, but they don't like each other at all. And I think the reason why the Red Wings will win this series in 6 or 7 games, and why they will, is because at the end of the day, my belief is that if you put the Red Wings in the playoffs, then they have the chance of winning because they are in the playoffs. End of story. They made the postseason for 23 straight seasons, through thick, through thin. I think the baton has been passed quite well from Lidstrom now to Pavel Datsyuk to anchor that defense, and the way that Jimmy Howard is playing right now, he matches up with anybody else, any other goaltender in the postseason as well as. That's why I look at the series, and yes, I know what Chicago's done in the regular season. I know what they have, and this is a team that has an extremely bright future after winning the Cup and then losing half their starting lineup. They have the ability, the Red Wings have, to bring it to Chicago every single night. It will go probably to 7 games, and if you put Detroit in a 7-game series or in a 7th game, all bets are off, and I really have I fully believe the Detroit Red Wings are going to move past this round and into the conference finals.
Yeah, I'll tell you why I disagree though. I think that Detroit, for all their experience, for all their past success, this is not your older brother Detroit Red Wings team anymore. This is not the same team. They are not as deep. They are not as talented. Yes, they have Datsyuk. Yes, they have Zetterberg. They still have Nicholas Kronwall, and Jimmy Howard's been great. But the defense, other than Kronwall, is really not that good. It's been a huge issue, and I think this is a team that really they had a lot of trouble. And I thought this series would go to 7 against Anaheim, but quite frankly, they had a little more trouble with Anaheim than I expected from them. And I think ultimately their experience pushed them over the hump, to win that 7-game series. But Chicago, if you think Anaheim was a challenge, Chicago was going to be that much more of a challenge. And, it's not even the case of the experienced team versus a non-experienced team anymore, because the Chicago Blackhawks have now won a Stanley Cup of their own. And, they're right up there. They're more well-rounded. They have a goalie, Corey Crawford, who's capable of playing just as well as Jimmy Howard is, as good as Jimmy Howard's been. And I do think that this goes 7, but I think that the Blackhawks, they're just too much for the Red Wings to overcome. I really think that the Red Wings, in a way, are kind of on their way down. After next season, Pavel Datsyuk may go to Russia, to play in the KHL. Zetterberg is getting up there in age. Kronwall is really the only steady defenseman on that blue line. There are a lot of issues in Detroit, and this is becoming an issue very, very quickly. I do like some of the depth players they have, particularly Gustav Nyquist, Damian Brunner, Justin Abdelkader. I love these guys. I really do. And I think particularly Nyquist, I think he has a chance to really be something special in a few years. But I think that the Blackhawks they're just too much for the Red Wings to handle. And I think that they're going to ultimately win the series.
All right. Well, moving now on to our favorite topic, slumping stars. Who should be kicked out of their city because they did not show up in the postseason? Let's start with, of course, we got to go with the losing teams because Rick Nash, he wanted to pull out with the Rangers. Yes, he did not show up at all in the first season, and the Rangers won in despite of him logging all those minutes and playing. But let's focus on the losing teams. Who should be kicked out? If they were free agents, who would you not re-sign on the losing teams? Let's start off with the Washington Capitals.
I mean, that's a tough spot because I can't say I wouldn't re-sign Alex Ovechkin even after that postseason. But certainly would be very upset with him. He after Game 1, like I said, he was a no-show, and I thought that was a major issue for them in the series. So, he needed to be better. He was a major disappointment. And this is a guy who was up for the MVP award. He's one of the 3 finalists for the MVP award this year. And yeah, he took them to the playoffs on his back. He also took them right out of it, in my opinion. So, I know the voting was done before the playoffs started, but if it was up to me at this point, he has played his way off of the MVP. Played his way out of the MVP conversation, in my opinion.
Well, certainly, I think that my vote would also go with Ovechkin, even though nobody in their right mind would kick him out of their city. But yes, I would definitely say Ovi was the star no-show for the Washington Capitals. Toronto, really, I think this is a whole team collective breakdown. I don't think it's any one player. If you want to,
you can say Mikhail Grabovski.
Yeah, maybe you point fingers at him.
That's a great series, but really, I think ultimately you're right. It was a collective breakdown. I wouldn't necessarily pin it on him or anything. He's not nearly on the same level as an Ovechkin in terms of his importance to his team and this and that. So but if there was one guy, I would say he needed to be a little better.
And Montreal, I think it was probably Carey Price because he could have played a lot better. I think he let in a couple of goals that he shouldn't have that normally he stops.
I would say most of those goals though were really on the defense, and there were games where Carey Price played very well, and the team just blew the lead. I think particularly in the 6-1 game against Ottawa. I'm trying to remember which game it was because I think there were 2 6-1 games, if I'm not mistaken. But there was one game where in the third period. It was a very close game, and all of a sudden, I think Ottawa got 2 goals, right in front of the net, off passes right in front of there was not a single Canadian defenseman in front of the net, and Price was just left to try and swim, and really, you can't leave your goaltender out to dry like that. I don't care who he is. I wouldn't necessarily blame Price because I thought he did play well, and I thought until he got injured, he gave them a chance to win. So yeah, it wouldn't have been Game 7 because Price didn't play in Game 7, but he was injured. But I think that he did give them a chance to win. It's hard to really say. I think with Montreal, so I think it's a collective, it's a collective meltdown. I think that there were a lot of no-shows for them, and I think that was the biggest issue for them.
I think with the Pittsburgh and Islanders series, this goes to the bench, and I think it's a Capuano issue that I would really take him out because Nabokov played the best that he can. And
I don't know about that, but he certainly wasn't the reason they lost.
No, I think that you, as a coach, have to understand your weaknesses as well as your pros, your strengths of your team. And Nabokov was not matching up so well against the Pittsburgh Penguins. Really, no goaltender can match up that well against the Pittsburgh Penguins. And as a coach, you have to know that, and you have to put your best defensive foot forward. And I don't think that Capuano did that. Therefore, that's who my vote is to kick out.
Not only that, I mean, again, he had to play Nabokov. They didn't really have another option. But in terms of, their defense, in terms of certain things, certainly a lot of a bunch of roster lineup decisions he made were very mind-boggling. I think that, for starters, he separated John Tavares and Matt Molson after game one, which I thought was one of the dumbest things he's ever done. Believe me, he's done a lot of dumb things. Why you do that? And then Matt Molson was basically a non-factor for the rest of the series, so that was just silly. And then after Andrew McDonald went down with an injury, he broke his hand. I think it was game 4. It was game 5. I think it was game 4. He instead of switching one defenseman in for McDonald, he decided to bring in 2 guys into the lineup who hadn't played a single minute in the playoffs. And benched Matt Carpenter instead, and that was silly. And then the next game they went out and lost 4-0. I'm not say that was the entire reason for it, but again, why would you do that? Why would you deviate so much from a lineup that just won you a hockey game?
Right.
It's got to surprise you a little bit. And Capuano's made these kinds of decisions all year long. Because, this is not the time to be experimenting and saying, well, now in the first round against Pittsburgh, now I'm going to separate John Tavares and Matt Molson. Like, what are you kidding me?
Right. Well, apparently,
I don't think that he is the coach to take them to the promised land, to be honest with you.
Well, yeah, he wasn't kidding with you because he actually did that. But in St. Louis, I wouldn't want to say that there really was any one player in particular to blame on St. Louis because overall, as a team, they're very young. Not a lot of experience in the postseason. But if I had to point a finger at anybody, it would be TJ Oshie because he really didn't come to play after the second game of the series. All that he really did, all that he really had was a couple of points, and that's it. After that, after he finished in I think it was the second or the third game, he didn't play, didn't show up, and really was I don't want to say the catalyst for the reason that they lost, but certainly could have helped his own team's cause, could have helped them go to the next level, really give the Kings a run for their money. And I don't really think it's one player. I think it's the collective, the whole team, not having a lot of that experience, not having a lot of that playoff exposure, the pressure. It's different. You come in now as a team that you were number 4 in the conference. You played very well in the strike-shortened season. You did a lot of things that not many people thought you were going to do this year. But even so, if I had to point a finger at anybody, it would be him.
Yeah, I would say so.
And now moving on to the Vancouver series, Vancouver and the Sharks. It's just Vancouver. Just throw them out. Keep the Sedins. Send them somewhere else and just chuck the rest of the team.
I'll tell you what it is. I don't think it was the seeding in particular. I think it's 2 things. Well, you have to start with the coach. Alain Vigneault is really, I'd say he is the worst coach in the league. If you kind of think about it, I also said that about Dan Bylsma. It's kind of crazy to think that the 2 of the worst coaches in the league coach 2 of the better teams in the league. But that's the case here. Alain Vigneault's teams are undisciplined. They make a lot of mistakes.
I think it's over his head in Vancouver.
Not just that though. First of all, it is over his head, but you got to be able to manage these guys. And not only that, you cannot go into the playoffs with a goaltending controversy. If you're a team and you don't know who the heck is going to play, every single night, and that doesn't really bode well for your confidence. You got to know, it always helps to know as a player. I mean, I don't play in the NHL, I do play ice hockey, but it always helps to know that your goalie back there is gonna help you out, and to even know who that goalie is for for starters. And the fact that the Canucks don't always know that, is it going to be Schneider? Is it going to be Long? It's enough. You cannot go into the playoffs with a goaltending controversy and expect to be a contender. And quite frankly, they were just completely outplayed in this series, and I think that was definitely part of it.
I think
even for your goaltender, how are you supposed to get on a roll if you don't know if you're going to start every night? You don't know when you're going to start or if you're going to start. It's very difficult.
No, I think for what Vigneault, even if he would have gone out to the media and said, my starting goaltender is Roberto Luongo no matter what, or my starting goaltender is going to be Corey Schneider no matter what, I don't think that would have helped. Because everybody in the media knows that there's a goaltending controversy. The players know there's a goaltending controversy.
I don't know. To an extent, the media, but that wouldn't have made it nearly. I think it wouldn't have been nearly as bad. Certainly there are things in the media that the players tune out, and I think that would have been one of them. But the fact that he couldn't even do that he had no confidence in them, and I think very similar with Bylsma and Marc-Andre Fleury, even from before the series started, he basically, basically laid it all out and said, if Marc-Andre Fleury doesn't perform, we're going to take him out. That doesn't do much for Marc-Andre Fleury's confidence. You can BS the media and say, oh yeah, we have all the confidence in Marc-Andre Fleury in the world. It wouldn't be the first time a coach said that and didn't actually necessarily mean it.
Yeah.
But it certainly didn't bode well for Marc-Andre Fleury. And the Penguins also, not very much different to the Canucks, also have somewhat of a goaltending controversy on their hands.
And
you start at the start of the series.
That's right.
You go back to Fleury and give him a chance. Do you stay with O'Kuhn? It's kind of difficult, But certainly with Vancouver, I think that was very much part of their undoing.
And now in Minnesota, I think they played phenomenally for what they have. They played fantastic against the opponent that they were drawn with. And I don't blame anybody in Minnesota. They just went up against a very, very good team. And they just don't have the experience yet. Although I will say Zach Parise should have taken some of the playoff experience he had with the Devils, some of that veteran leadership, and shown it and given it to some of the other players. But
he wasn't a no-show, though.
Yeah, we're not saying he was a no-show. I'm thinking more from a leadership perspective. He should have taken some of the younger guys under his wing and say, look, this is the playoffs. This is pressure. This is how we deal with it.
I mean, certainly, I think he did do that to an extent, but again, just because you do that doesn't mean you're necessarily going to win a series.
True.
I wasn't worried about Zach Parise in terms of leadership.
No, they played very well.
Right, he played very well,
as a
and
team.
I do think that some of their younger players did step up. I mean, Jason Zucker, one of their rookies, had an overtime winner. There were guys who stepped up, but I think at the end of the day, like you said, I think they were just outclassed. I mean, this is a team that doesn't have a ton of depth yet, especially on defense. They have Ryan Suter, who in my mind should be the Norris Trophy winner, and then this rookie Jonas Brodin, who plays with him. So those two guys are good. But outside of that, not much. And again, it didn't help that they didn't have Nicholas Backstrom for this series. That was a bit of an issue for them.
Yeah.
So I don't think they would have won the series even with Backstrom, but it certainly didn't help.
Well, and certainly there's a lot of hope and a lot of bright spot future for the Minnesota Wild for what they have. Very solid young team, and like you said, a couple of depth players, very well coached as well. Yes, a couple depth players away from really making a run. I think they're that's really it. Now, lastly, before we move on to the awards in Anaheim, this was a Corey Perry no-show this series, and he is just really come on, Perry. Getzlaf, these are the guys who must step up their game in the postseason, and Detroit did. Either it was Detroit didn't allow them to do that, or something happened on their own mind where they figure, regular season, postseason, all the same, and they didn't take it to the next level.
Yeah, I'll tell you what I think happened with Anaheim. I mean, as for Getzlaf, I think Getzlaf did a good job in the series. Perry wasn't as much, but again, not terrible. I think that it's two things. One, the Ducks' defense is not that good, and it was exposed in the series. They blew leads. They came back, but they also blew leads, and they couldn't contain the Red Wings at times. And Jonas Hiller was shaky, and there have been times in his career where he's been stellar. There have been times in his career where you don't quite know what goaltender you're going to get. And I think this was one of those the latter examples. Jonas Hiller wasn't the steady rock that they needed him to be, and Jimmy Howard for the Red Wings was. And I think that was one of the big differences in this series. So I'd say that the defensive goaltending was a major part of why Anaheim faltered. You have young guys on the defense like Cam Fowler, who's going to get better, who's going to be a stud. But again, not there yet. And you saw that in the series.
Well, in a series where you ride your hot hand, and Corey Perry does not score once in the 7-game series.
Yeah, he was definitely not good.
Yeah, definitely an issue for them.
He's the reason they lost the series. Even if he pots a couple, I'm not.
No, it's more than that. He wasn't fighting for pucks in the corner. He was retaliating more than he was playing defense and checking people.
I would say though in his case that's more of a fluke though, because this is a guy who has stepped up in the playoffs past and has shown that. So if anything, maybe you attribute that more to the way Detroit handled him.
Maybe.
Because Corey is not someone who generally does not show up come playoff time.
Right. That is true. He usually is the guy who you can ride with, but for whatever reason did not play this postseason in the first round as well as he has in the past, as well as we know that he could play. Now, for our last but not least, our favorite time of the show, it's the NHL finalists, why somebody should win and who is going to get snubbed. Let's start with Let's start with the Norris. You were on the Norris before there with Minnesota, and why you think Ryan Suter should get it. Okay, let's say Suter gets it. Who is the runner-up? Who do you think possibly could have gotten it elsewhere on another team, and why Suter is the better man for it?
You mean as opposed to, you mean outside the three that were nominated?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think Nicholas Cronwell of the Red Wings is certainly one of those guys. He had a great year, both ends of the ice, and certainly more deserving than Chris Letang. I'll tell you what, I say there are a handful of defensemen who deserve to be there more than Chris Letang. But Cronwell really, especially, once Lidstrom retired, I'd say, I think it's very underrated how much pressure that guy was under, because now he was second in command almost to Lidstrom, and now that Lidstrom was gone, it was really all on him to become the anchor of that blue line, and in that city, that's a tremendous amount of pressure, and I don't think people realize that. I don't think that's been made of as big of a deal as it should be. And the guy really stepped in and did a very good job in that situation. And I think that he deserved to be nominated. And
I very, very much agree with you in that department. I think Chris Letang is way in over his head for whatever reason.
I'm and this is going to be a little bit of a mini rant, but I'm kind of tired of the guy who puts up the most points winning the Norris Trophy. If they want to go ahead and have a Bobby Orr award, they can do that. But the Norris Trophy is about more than just points. It's supposed to be awarded to the to the defenseman who exhibits the best all-around skills. And quite frankly, Chris Letang cannot passes the puck more often to the other team than he does to his own teammates.
Right.
And so he has no business being in this conversation.
Right. And I certainly say that when I made that mention earlier when we were talking about the Detroit Red Wings, and I say that it was Pavel Datsyuk who had taken the baton from Nick Lidstrom. That was a little bit of a mental lapse there. It said definitely is Cronwell. What he's done with that, you mentioned, with that pressure on his shoulders and how he's taken it to the next level, to the best that he can up to this point, is something that really bodes to be tabbed as at least as a finalist, even if he doesn't win. Absolutely. But even as a finalist, in recognition of what he's done, it almost seems as if the election committee expects somebody on Detroit to play that well on defense, and if they don't, then it's like, what's going on? Therefore, they don't necessarily look at a defenseman on Detroit year in, year out saying, finalist.
One thing to play, well when you're with Lidstrom, you kind of have that cushion, but to then take that away and still be as good, I think that's very impressive. I would pick Rock to win. He was in the top. I think he was at the top or very near the top in average time on ice. And not only that, he had his defense partner Jonas Brodin as a rookie, and he had to handle that and kind of bring him along, and keep that blue line steady playing with a rookie. That's not easy to do, and he did a very good job. I think that he deserves it.
When you now look over to the Lindsay Award, it's the most outstanding player, I really think that for what the award is meant to show, what the award is meant to exhibit, that you give it to Alexander Ovechkin because of the points he put up this season. Number 1 in goals, number 2 in assists, tie for number 3 in points overall, number 4 in the plus-minus. I think for what it shows as the most outstanding player, if this award seems to be for the player, that it was Ovechkin to take this.
Maybe. We'll get to the Hart Trophy in a minute, but at least for this award, I do think Sidney Crosby deserves it. The guy missed 12 games, still finished third in scoring. He was on pace for one of the best. He in an 82-game season, this guy would put up the best point totals that we've seen in years and years. The guy was outstanding. I'm not going to deny that. And again, we'll get into the MVP discussion in a few minutes, but at least for this award, Crosby was outstanding. That you can't take away from him. And I do think that you have to take that into consideration.
I would give Crosby the Masterton because that's the comeback player of the year essentially, and that's what he was. Although I know he's going to win it, but I really think Josh Harding should win it.
Yeah, the guy has multiple sclerosis. I don't think it gets more, I don't think a comeback situation gets, any tougher than that.
Yeah, and I really think Harding should win, but I don't think it's going to happen. Yeah. That's just what I'm looking at it with that. Now, for the Vezina, it's really going to come down to Lundqvist and Antiniemi for this.
Right. Which is a shame because, in my opinion, the best goalie is not the one who's going to win it. I think Sergei Bobrovsky is outstanding. I actually said this at the time when he was playing for the Flyers. I can't remember how many times I kept saying this guy is going to be a stud. This guy's going to be a stud. And then he'd have some bad nights, and I get a little negative feedback about that. Oh, you're kidding. This guy's not that good. Yeah, and I'll tell you what, the fact that the guy goes off to Columbus and now a Vezina Trophy finalist, it gives me such knockouts, So I'll tell you, the guy has so much talent, and he does not have a very good defense in front of him. He literally stood on his head this year.
Yeah.
I think, at least as far as this year goes, I think he was the best goaltender. I don't think he wins it.
No,
but
it's going to be. Yeah, it's going to be either Antiniemi or Henrik Lundqvist. All three of the finalists really, all very well deserving. Very well deserving. And I don't think you can.
The award where that applies.
And I really don't think that you can go wrong with any of those picks at the end of the day. Possibly the reason why Bob won't win is because he's not the household name. And he's not a name that is recognized with success. That is probably working against him as to why Lundqvist or Niemi, but nonetheless, all three of them very well-deserving candidates for finalists for the Norris for the best goaltender this season. Best GM. I really don't see what people are thinking with some of the finalists, but what Marc Bergevin put together in Montreal, I really would not be shocked if he took home the prize this season, because the team of how they played last year, where they finished last season, and what the difference was this season, much different.
He did a good job, and not only that, he traded Eric Holt to Michael Ryder, and Michael Ryder ended up being a good player for them down the stretch. He brought and he didn't draft Brendan Gallagher, but he did bring him along. He did draft Alex Galchenyuk, and Galchenyuk was good for them this year. He brought in Brandon Trust. So he did make moves, and of course he hired Michel Therrien, who coached them very well this year. So I think there were moves that he made. I don't necessarily buy Murray of the Ducks as a good candidate. I mean, yes, I think the biggest thing for them is that he was able to re-sign Getzlaf and Perry, which I don't think anyone thought was going to happen. Certainly everyone thought these guys were going to leave Anaheim after the year, and these are going to be the two premier free agents on the market. Now they're both in Anaheim for the next 6 or 8 years.
Right.
I forget exactly how many years, but a stunning achievement nonetheless. But other than that, basically the same team as last year, minus Victor Fast and Sheldon Surrey.
Right.
So from that perspective, I don't think that he necessarily deserved it. I thought Garth Snow really should have been worthy, or Stan Bowman of Chicago. Would have also been up there. But I think you have to give it to Ray Shero. I mean, the guy was able to go out and get Iginla, Joe McGinley and Brendan Morrow, and that was just huge. He did make the most moves, but he did something that I think few people thought he was going to do. I don't think anyone thought he was going to end up with both players. And he ended up making some very good trades. He's a smart GM. He's proven that. So I like him.
Lastly, and this is going to cause, I think, so much controversy, the Hart Trophy. You have Alex Ovechkin, Sidney Crosby, and who? Oh, John Tavares. For me, and I know you have a lot to say on this, for me, really, it's quite simple. Ovechkin, no, because when you look at the Hart Trophy and what it means, it's supposed to be the winner who has the quote, the player has the quote, most adjudged value to his team.
I understand.
Ovechkin has that value, but would his team still make the playoffs without him? That's how I'm looking at it.
I don't think so.
Crosby, will he not? I think his team has made the playoffs in the past without him.
Sure, they were great without him.
But I think when you look at the three finalists, and the one who really exemplifies the most value to his team is John Tavares, because unlike Ovechkin, who you can make the argument that the team does not make the playoffs this year, and it's a very solid argument that the Capitals do not make the playoffs this year without him. The difference between he and Tavares is that Tavares makes his teammates better. every night.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Ovechkin seems to sometimes make his teammates better. Sometimes it seems he's playing for the point total in the column at the end of the game, and it's not so much for his teammates. Tavares will pass up those shots. He'll make his teammates better. He gets in their face when they're not playing to the capabilities that he knows that they can play, and he makes sure that everybody is showing up to the game at every given night.
Absolutely. I mean, Tavares, Mark Streit's the captain, but John Tavares is really the de facto captain. And, he really does step up and make his teammates better. He scores clutch goals. He is every bit, he fits the description of an MVP as well as you possibly could. I think at least at the time of the voting, Ovechkin also would be a worthy choice because the bottom line is you can't ignore the fact that he did take this team on his back, regardless of whether or not other guys on the team should have been playing better or whatnot, regardless of whether or not they should have been out of the playoffs, at that point. The bottom line is he took his team to the playoffs. He went on a scorching run. He went from obscurity to leading the league in goals in the blink of an eye, and you can't ignore what he did. You can tangibly see the effect that his improved play had on the team and their outlook.
Right.
I think again the voting concluded before at the end of the regular season. I think if the voting would have been going on until now, I think there were a lot of people who would have changed their minds about voting for Ovechkin. The guy, like I said, he backed the team out of the playoffs also.
Right.
Kind of. And whereas Tavares had 5 points in 6 games and really stepped up. So I think Ovechkin, at least at the time of the voting, did make sense as a worthy candidate, and I don't blame people for voting for him. I think Crosby had no business being on this ballot, and again, like you can make that argument. I think there are going to be years where he does deserve the MVP. Because you can be a good team, but if someone really steps up and and kind of takes over a series for you or takes over a bunch, several games for you, then yeah, I don't buy the argument that you can't ever win an MVP award if you're the best player in the league. But at the same token, in a season like this where Crosby A, missed time, and B, had a team that played well when he missed time, I think it's unfair, especially to some candidates out there who actually played the entire season, like say Jonathan Toews of the Chicago Blackhawks,
right,
who I think deserve to be in this conversation.
Right.
I don't, Crosby, and for all of his accomplishments this year, the bottom line is he missed a quarter of the season.
Right.
And in my mind, you have to be there. You got to be there for your team all throughout. If you're going to be considered the MVP, you need to have been there from the very beginning to the very end.
I think also for him, he shoots himself in the foot because he plays on such a talented team. So people will look at the team and say, "Hey, well, really, right. What's the difference?"
I don't buy that you can never win the MVP award even in that situation. But this year is not one.
No. Now the last thing before we call it a night and call it a day and wish everybody a good holiday, we have one team still to pick: Rangers or Bruins, and in how many games? You are first.
Well, I'm going to pick the Bruins in 7, and again, the reason why I choose 7 is I really do think either team can win the series, but my gut tells me Boston. I think that they are deeper than the Rangers. They are. I think that maybe not as good, not as good defensively as the Rangers, but still very good defensively. And Tuukka Rask is not as good as Henrik Lundqvist, but still, again, a very good goalie in his own right. And certainly on offense, the Bruins have more depth and more size on offense, quite frankly, as well. I just think that the depth is going to be an issue. I think this is a very good matchup for the Rangers, believe it or not. Had they played Toronto, I think that would have given the Rangers a real nightmare. Not just because Toronto gave them trouble in the regular season, but because, you look at it just from a game, from the way these two teams play, forget the results of the regular season. Toronto's a very fast-skating team. The Rangers are not. I think they would wear the Rangers down. Especially after the Rangers just played a 7-game series with Washington.
Right.
I think that would have been a nightmare. Boston plays more their style, more that along the board defensive, physical game.
Throw it in and chase it.
Oh, well for the Rangers.
And now when I look at the Boston Bruins and like some of the things that you just said, that they play more in line with what the Rangers want for an opponent, it seems to me that there's two things that have to happen in order for the Rangers to win. One, Rick Nash has to score.
Absolutely.
And if he doesn't score, with all respect to the Washington Capitals, the Boston Bruins are a much different team. They play a different method. And the Capitals, you know the team because you've played them 4 out of the last 5 postseasons. This is your 3rd meeting in a row. So everybody knows everybody else, very well acquainted. You've gone out to dinner maybe a couple times, and you know how everybody is. But Boston does offer something different. They have a better defense. They have different role players who fill out roles in a sense better than Washington. But the main thing with Boston is no matter how far back they are down, and we saw this happen in Game 7, they're resilient. They know how to fight and claw their way back into games or hang around in games long enough that they're one score away from time.
I know the Rangers in their own right, though. I mean, they faced 2 series deficits against Washington.
Correct.
The first one was a 2-0 hole.
2-0, yes.
Right, that they came back and won the series. You know, they were down 2-0. They came back, tied up. They were down 3-2. You know, in a do or die Game 6, won the game. You know, did what they had to do, clamped down. So, you know, again, I think these are both teams with, you know, a lot of mental fortitude. But I think the Bruins are a little deeper, and you know, you can't ignore the fact that most of the guys in the room have, you know, are only 2 years removed from the Stanley Cup championship. So I think that does play in as well. The X factor in this game is not going to come down to Brick Nash scoring or Tyler Seguin get scoring as well. It's not going to come down to the coaches. It's not going to come down to the defense. It's not going to come down to the goaltending. It's going to come down to the power play. The Rangers. Both these teams are actually brutal on the power play, which is great news for the Rangers. But you know,
the Rangers have to start scoring on the power play.
In my mind, I'll never understand why Boston can't get it going because they have Chara at the point. The Rangers, I kind of understand because they don't really have that quarterback on the power play. Boston has no business, you know, has no excuse for having as bad a power play as they do.
So, if in order for the Rangers to win, that's the 2 keys: is their power play has got to get better, and Nash has to score.
You know,
just must.
Nash has to score, but also, I mean, Henrik Lundqvist has shown he can steal games.
Yeah, look at Game 6.
I don't think it's any different. You know, I think he can steal a win or 2 for the Rangers in the series. You know, and if he does, that's gonna bode very well for them.
Yeah, and what you end up having is a very fun matchup. These are 2 teams who are pretty familiar with one another, and it's going to be a very enjoyable matchup to watch. To see, just like it's going to be with Chicago and Detroit, it'll be entertaining. This one will also be fun. It'll be an enjoyable matchup for the fans. It may be a bit of a nail-biter. It probably will go to 6 or 7. This is not going to be, settled in the first 4 games.
I'd be surprised if it was. You know, anything can happen in hockey. We've seen it before. But.
Right, but if you're thinking as to what they've shown, it's not like they really want the play from the teams don't show from both Boston and the Rangers that they really want to run the tables right away, that they're keen on settling into the series and see what happens in 7 games. Just because they are the Rangers and they have Henrik Lundqvist, I have to give them the edge in that series. But we'll see. We'll see what happens, and that's what playoff hockey is all about. And for that price is why we watch the game, or why you play to win the game, as Herm Edwards was wont to say. And it'll be fun. It'll be a good time, and I think that what we will come out with from this next round of playoffs all around is we will see, as always is, who stays, who goes, who has the fortitude to play above the level and capabilities that they're able to.
Absolutely.
And until next time, we'll leave you all with this. I guess that's that. Until next week, when we get back, hopefully we'll be able to comment on some of the things that we said today, and either for good, for bad, or for ugly. It should be a fun time.
Absolutely. Looking forward.
Until next time, the good old hockey game.